Questions. Does every rock band or rock song have a common thread? Is it guitar? Is it the lead musician? Is it the era? Is it the chords? What is it about rock that feels like already been there, done that? Before I start, or you start, I know that there are creative songs and innovative rock acts in the world, now and from the past. I personally think rock acts like Radiohead, Stereolab, Todd Rundgren, Steely Dan and N.E.R.D are some of the most underappreciated musicians of any genre. I also get that other genres are wild repetitive, but I'm focusing on rock because throughout my life, many fans of rock's subgenres seem to act the most snobbish and picky about their music taste. Rock is one of the most vague genres of music. Let's look at some official definitions. Oxford Languages calls rock music a form of popular music that evolved from rock and roll and pop music during the mid and late 1960s. Britannica says rock, also called rock and roll, is a form of popular music that emerged in the 1950s. So right away we're off to a rocky start with conflicting timelines. Wikipedia states that rock music is a broad genre of popular music that originated as rock and roll in the US in the late 1940s and early 50s, developing into a range of different styles in the mid-60s and later, particularly in the US and UK. As for the Free Dictionary, rock is a type of pop music that developed out of rock and roll in the 1960s and 1970s. It is based around amplified instruments, especially the electric guitar and electric bass, and is characterized by a strong bass line and driving rhythms. So, that collective timeline hit 4 different decades by 4 different sources. That should have been the easy part, but even that's tricky. Now let's talk about the other elements of rock. Wiktionary boldly defines rock as any of various genres of popular music employing electrical amplification. Wild, vague, and not always true, but stay tuned. Based on the Canadian government, rock and rock-oriented music is characterized by a strong beat, the use of blues forms, and the presence of rock instruments such as electric guitar, electric bass, electric organ, or electric piano. The Collins Co-Build English Dictionary has a long definition. Based on a vast database of British usage, rock is a kind of music with simple tunes and a very strong beat that is played and sung, usually loudly, by a small group of people with electric guitars and drums. But Britannica follows up with, there are so many exceptions to this description that it is practically useless. Agreed. Britannica properly sums things up saying dictionary definitions of rock are problematic, not least because the term has different resonance in its British and American usages. There is basic agreement that rock is a form of music with a strong beat, but it is difficult to be much more explicit. Next, I want to discuss the good and the bad about how Musical Dictionary assesses rock music. They say because its subgenres are so diverse, rock is defined more by its overall aesthetic than any specific musical features. Rock is about electrifying energy, especially the youthful, rebellious energy of its founders. This is the good, or what I agree with and don't mind about rock. Musical Dictionary adds, maybe more than any other genre, rock is defined by a single instrument, the electric guitar. This is the bad, or what I feel is mostly true and limiting, but actually not 100% the case. Maybe like 99 point, the most you can go before 100% the case. Musical Dictionary also states most rock music emphasizes the pentatonic scale, a bare-bones scale that comes from blues music. That sound can be used in any of rock's many subgenres and not seem out of place. I personally consider this a bonus section, the ugly, or the thing I can't stand about most rock music. It's even more limiting than the instrumentation used, since its core is just 5 distinct notes, or colors, which is how I hear and look at it. Shout out all the other self-prescribed synesthetes, or those with synesthesia. So let's summarize. The good, rock's vibe. The bad, rock's instrumentation. And the ugly, rock's music theory. For me, these are the immediate ties to rock's predictability. Let me address each. Vibe. This is what I actually support about rock. The energy, the feel. But how can that be predictable or even an issue? I'd say it's a combination of the overall instrumentation, by default, and any particular rock vocalist's tonal delivery. Example, screamo, raspy, rapping, and what I call light FM voice. It's hard to find any rock tunes outside of the typical vibe, except when you get to acts like N.E.R.D, whose lead vocalist, Pharrell Williams, doesn't really resemble any of his rock predecessors physically. He uses a soft voice, a head voice, and he doesn't have the standard American or British dialects of mainstream rock. That part could be because he's just from a different environment than most rockers, but regardless, his lingo, his accent, his voice, all unique compared to the average rock act. Continuing on to instrumentation, guitar, particularly electric guitar. Name a rock song off the top of your head without guitar, let alone 2 electric guitars. And let's ignore that bass guitar is technically or typically a guitar that's electric. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you're stuck, let me help you. It's clearly possible to make a song without electric guitar. Why aren't there more songs like that? I'm even cool with more keytar, as you can virtually play any sound in the world with that. You might say the guitar allows for easy distortion, but you can add distortion to literally anything. I've done it to a flute and even wind in a room. You could say that the strap is convenient for portability. Okay, use a sax or trumpet. I've had enough of seeing a pool of pedals on stages though. My guess for why electric guitar tops rock's preference is that it's the look. I believe rock fans have been hypnotized since the start to identify with the guitar's image on stage. And from there, rock musicians continue to fall into place over the years. Maybe for the nostalgic or convenience reasons too. Or maybe it's like, how else would you know it's a rock band without a guitarist standing around? Even from around the 40s, you see people like Chuck Berry and oh wait, way back as early as the 30s, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the oddly overlooked and unsung Sister Tharpe, floating with an amp guitar in their hands. N.E.R.D, who I'm clearly a fan of, as I mentioned them 3 times already before even mentioning true rock legends, caught my attention for using non-typical sounds and drum patterns. Their tracks often feature a type of clavichord sounding keyboard synth. Something as simple as that is unique, literally playing the same notes or chords with a different sound. But at the same time, I can understand if rock's reason for staying so consistent with guitar sounds is to sort of relive or remember the good times and to keep that going throughout generations. I get it. I personally can listen to some Fender Rhodes keys on every song, any genre forever. For me, it doesn't necessarily need to be different. Maybe just try playing old things in a new way. Leading me to music theory. Again, I consider this the ugly. Rock has become so lenient sonically that all I have to do is randomly swipe my guitar or randomly play a quick run, and I can fool you into thinking that I'm a somewhat competent rock musician. This can't happen so easily in some other genres I generally like. You can't just sing lyrics and it's R&B. You don't just rhyme words and it's hip hop. However, jazz suffers a little bit of the rock dilemma, since all I have to do is play a walking bass line, hit some swing cymbals, and hit altered or extended chords for you to think jazzy. But the difference between jazz and rock's issue is that jazz doesn't have just one overarching instrument generally tied to it. Going back to the instrumentation section of my point. There's plenty of jazz tracks with no piano, guitar, bass, or even drums. Guitar and rock have become just too mutually inclusive. Back to music theory. Even before reading the definitions, when I personally think of rock, it's mostly power chords and the pentatonic scale. Regarding chords, my favorite thing to focus on musically, the rock music I like most has colorful chords within it. Ones that you probably call jazzy or complex. Major 7ths, 9ths, dominant 13ths. N.E.R.D, the band I'm apparently a groupie for, uses chord progressions that I feel should be included more often in rock. And it's such a simple addition. Literally just add a note or two to a basic triad block chord or arpeggio. I feel like most rock musicians learned a few chords and said, that's enough. Or even more shameful, something like, chords with extensions are too jazzy and complex. Very closed-minded. N.E.R.D also caught my attention for using non-typical drum rhythms. Several of their songs have kicks hitting on unconventional beats and snares doing more than second beat, fourth beat fill, or blast beats, or 4 on the floor. When I say rock, you might right away think punk or metal, and if you did, chances are close to guaranteed that I can guess the drum pattern that came in your mind. Here's a list of some particularly creative rock songs, all from the notorious N.E.R.D.
It all comes crashing.
Revisiting rock definitions, the Free Dictionary has a second definition for rock. A form of popular music characterized by electronically amplified instrumentation, a heavily accented beat, and relatively simple phrase structure. Originating in the US in the 1950s, rock incorporates a variety of musical styles, especially rhythm and blues, country music, and gospel. That all seems more thorough, but still doesn't help a lot and isn't fair to call rock simple. Notice I've never said easy or simple when describing rock music, only predictable. The Mona Lisa, or whatever your highest antique art reference is, was a complex piece of work, but it's still predictable, as in there's no neon colors, no extraordinary type of brush used, but at the same time, I couldn't make it personally. I use this analogy because your favorite rocker can only play so many notes, so many chords, so many beats, but they can still do it creatively if they choose. I've personally seen some of the most dexterous musicians ever on various instruments, many located within the rock genre. I couldn't play a left-handed guitar as a righty, like Hendrix did, conversely as a lefty. Flea, of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, is one of the most monster bassists, dead or alive. Steve Gadd and The Who's Keith Moon are up there with any top drummer, along with John Bonham, who hit a kick more creatively than just about anyone. Tosin Abasi, Jeff Beck, Eddie Van Halen. These are some A-list guitarists to me, and many other people. I can go on and so on. So I know I could get more of what I want if fans cared more about what I care about musically. And all that really is just creativity. Here's another fun rock definition I want to address from Princeton's WordNet. A genre of popular music originating in the 1950s, a blend of black rhythm and blues with white country and western. So color, specifically race, that's a thing. You may not see it or identify with it, but it's there. If you don't want to acknowledge it, I'll just continue as if you're racially, visually impaired. I don't think that any extensive historical discussion on rock can ignore there being a lack of diversity. Not just racially, but culturally, sexually, stylistically. I've already annoyingly mentioned N.E.R.D, a band fronted by a black guy, enough to make you question listening to me this far. But I also noticed that several pioneers regarding rock music are in fact black. I brought up Chuck Berry and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, but think about guys like Jimi Hendrix for his fuzz sound, Prince for his overall vibe, and Stevie Wonder for his contribution to synthesizers and music arrangement overall. I'm probably the slightest bias because I'm willingly Afro-American, but I don't feel anyone can objectively say colored folk can't or haven't offered something different to rock and music altogether. Even if it's as simple as pronunciation of lyrics, or fashion, or the story of song lyrics themselves. Here's a list of some other colored rock acts. Tina Turner, Santana, Hootie and the Blowfish, the Isley Brothers, Dave Navarro, Little Richard, Jackie Brenston, Malo, and TV on the radio. What about women? People might forget that the voice is an instrument, and women certainly offer a different sound there. That alone checks a box for me regarding being unique. Their vocal cords are literally different. Outside of Freddie Mercury, Axl Rose, Prince, and other high-pitched male singers, women generally offer the highest registers of music notes, and they give a different, and I say more pleasant, tone. That's a whole sex of unique vocal DNA. Even if you choose to sexistly view them as just eye candy, why wouldn't there be more women than men leading bands? Here's a short list of some rock acts featuring frontwomen. Janis Joplin, Joan Jett, Courtney Love, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Blondie, Eurythmics, Paramore, Four Non Blondes, Cocteau Twins, The Bangles, Tina Turner, The Sundays, Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Velocity Girl, Evanescence, and No Doubt. So I took this musical adventure for a handful of reasons. To find diversity in rock songs, make a clearer definition of rock music, highlight almost all of the popular subgenres that I could currently find, hear more within the catalog of bands that I only know like one song of, and to actually hear bands I've heard of, yet never listened to their music. So let's go. I'm starting out with a list of the professional rock bands I've heard of in order to possibly find a common thread and answer why rock generally sounds like deja vu. I'll be featuring one randomly selected example of each band's work. I avoided songs I've already listened to before so that this is unbiased, such as avoiding any memories attached to a particular tune or hearing something so many times that it became annoying. So that eliminates N.E.R.D for me because I already experienced everything I can find from them. Some of you might not consider them a rock band, but feel free to enter the comments. I likely left out dozens of bands I never realized I heard of, yet I have heard their music before, like Europe, which I just realized performed the final countdown. I also got a little lazy with screen grabbing so many songs, so I left out acts that are essentially solo artists, like Elton John, lead stars with a backing band, like Santana, fluid in terms of musical genre, like Prince, and any that simply branched off on their own a bit, like Dave Navarro. So also know Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Lenny Kravitz, Kid Rock, Eric Clapton, Peter Frampton, Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Bob Seger, Billy Joel, Neil Young, Alice Cooper, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Janis Joplin, John Mellencamp, Steve Miller, Roy Orbison, Rod Stewart, Van Morrison, Joan Jett, Paul Simon, Neil Diamond, David Bowie, Frank Zappa, Billy Idol, Bruce Springsteen, Jerry Lee Lewis, Iggy Pop, Courtney Love, Buddy Holly, Marilyn Manson, Huey Lewis, John Mayer, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Manfred Mann, King Krul, Jackie Brenston, and Meatloaf. Here are the bands I heard of before my recent rock deep dive.
Come to me, my sweetest friend. Came to me, I get over them from looking. I've been hanging around this town. Is it all? I leave it all to you. Don't love me now. Can't explain how Johnny come lately. Troubles will come. Riders on the storm. Things right, so just hold tight. Everything. Love is a dangerous drug. Some people live their dream. Don't say a prayer for me. Get me wrong. Baseline in another place. She don't use jelly or. Everybody has their own opinion. If you want it, don't sound like. Ain't got no time. 100 years will never. 'Cause everyone here hates like a genie trying to remember, but it's gone. Then you try to do what you do. You say you are. show tonight. There goes my hero. Well, she's on me. Down in a hole. Give me a shot at love. Will you fight the hand that we was young? How many now in the fire? I'm so glad you were so small. I feel the pain of it. Open up your eyes. Fever got me aching. Where beside the head she had one white eye, one blank stare. Young blood, doesn't it feel like the ocean bleeds salty, won't you? It's a monkey in the jungle. What? Up, down, surround, please don't let to be whatever. Arabella's got some interstellar gator skin boots. Show me, show me, show me how you do. I'm trying to live. Boy, never. Yeah. It's been a long way down. What you want? Crazy, dirty. I'm off into the brave. Left to fly. Disappear. Place like it's free. Rolling thunder, pouring rain. He took me to another innocent man. So nobody ever told his baby. Shadows of another day. I've always known that the mirror. I smell your death. On your feet to feel the beat, it goes straight to your soul. Somebody else was me. 1, 2, 3, go. Got the goddamn thing in my head. I got it, I know. They protect the land. The sand is bound to come up. Tell me why can't this be unpredictable? But in the end, there's right. The law and the law won. I'm losing and failing when I move. All I wanted was you. Something. I just wanna walk. We made a sour fading. It's in my soul. Day before a routine I've been longing for. What like a mask of self. I was waiting for the communist call. Oh, baby, when you cry, your baby really gets my goat. And I'm feeling down. The boys are back. The boys are back. I would hang up my stocking at Christmas. On one calls his chain of arms. When he catches angels as they fall. Darling, rock me a little while. Sweet blossom, come on, under the willow. So if it's gotta be another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Round mirror, keep on going. Girls don't like boys, girls like me. Terrible trouble, and I see. Someday, somehow. Out of the dark, I tried him out. Baby, we built this house. No one bites back his heart to you. Where everyone is. Sweet love illuminations. I'm a loser. When there's a burning in your heart. If I'm right or wrong. Let me search for things that you get. So I'm rolling out what around the backbone. Happy, are you sad? Wanna shoot your dad?
So that's out the way. I know that's a small sample size, but I wasn't too moved in terms of creativity. And that is why I don't really like rock on the surface. Maybe only 0.001% of it, but I'm just guessing a number. Keep in mind that there's over 1 million rock songs, so 0.001% is far from nothing. I like music that makes me say, that was unique. So it's not just rock I'm missing. Many genres and songs are categorized simply on where they were played, like Brit and Southern, when they were played, post and proto, who played them, Chicano and garage, or what was worn while playing them, glitter, glam. But many times these subgenres have no real distinguishable musical quality from certain other genres, such as alternative, indie, and experimental rock. Very vague labels, unhelpful. I feel that the closest comparison to such arbitrary type of categorizing lies within hip-hop, where in the 80s to early 90s, it was known as golden era. Yet I could produce a rap group today that samples that same exact beat feel, similar lyrical content, and they still wouldn't be considered a golden era act necessarily. And even disco followed this a bit, as it was often just up-tempo funk, R&B, or retroactively house music. Here I want to review the many genres within rock music, to the best of my understanding, and I want to attempt to describe them with my own knowledge of music theory and audio. I don't know who's in charge of defining genres, so I can't really contact anybody but me, and I trust me. Many of these were pulled from random playlists of relative genres, so pardon me if a song is miscategorized. I understand that I'm taking the smallest of sample size, but my goal isn't to find the greatest song. I'm just doing a grab bag to see how distinguishable rock genres might be. Also, my YouTube suggestion feed will be all messed up from here on out. Industrial rock seems to be slow tempo techno, a precursor to EDM maybe. Krautrock seems to be psychedelic punk, like an earlier version of punk. I might need more references for metalcore, but it just seems like slower heavy metal, a little more sensitive heavy metal. Post-hardcore just seems like stereotypical heavy metal. Roots rock just seems like danceable blues with some hard rock on it. Thrash metal just seems like any upbeat heavy metal with a busy kick drum. Groove metal just seems like a little slower metalcore. This particular shoegaze example seems like hard rock and surfer music blended. Oi is something that I would think of being played for a mosh pit. Danceable hard rock, people jumping back and forth. It's the classic snare on the and of every beat. Rapcore just sounds like vocal fry on top of an 80s hip hop beat with a little bit of metal on it. Rap metal, self-explanatory. Let's move on. Southern rock, again pretty self-explanatory. Have that southern feel to it. Country music behind some softer rock. Rock and roll, the original. Nothing fancy, just some bouncy guitar, standard kick snare, some shuffle hi-hats on and in between every beat, and a walking bass line. British Invasion is one of those tricky ones where it's mainly called what it is because of where it is, Great Britain. There's no particular identity to it aside from maybe the vocal arrangement. Proto-heavy metal is just what it is, the initial stages of heavy metal. I personally know progressive rock to just be a lighter version of hard rock, but nothing really to help me differentiate it from anything else. Glam rock just relates to what generally people wore and how their personality was when performing rock, so it's not so much about anything technical and musical. Soft rock is just soft rock. It's mellow, it's lighter. This is where the ballads are. Heavy metal is very broad. It's heavy, it's aggressive, it's hard hitting. This particular song is on the slower side, but heavy metal nonetheless. Christian rock is another broad genre, generally related to Christianity, worship, gospel. It's more about the lyrics. Musically, there's nothing distinctive about it. Punk rock owns the cliche or classic kick snare, or kick snare, kick snare, kick snare, kick snare, with some hi-hats on about every beat, usually open hi-hats. Post-punk is too broad, too general to really dive into, so that's going to be my definition for that. I never like post anything because that can literally be any genre, any style of music from that point on. Heartland rock takes me back to the southern rock and the country western inspired rock. Here's an example of something having Brit or any nationality in front of it, but not really being so much native to that nationality. I would just describe this as a version of dance rock, EDM, and pop is the all-time #1 worst description for a genre. Trap is pop now, as I'm saying this in 2021. Here's that pop spinoff again. I'd honestly just say that this is punk that's mainstream, particularly at the time where punk was pop. Alternative rock is just anything you want it to be. That's as much as I can tell you. I have no definition there. I'd be alright if you said that it's anything that's going against the grain of what's on the radio and still falls under rock. I've just always associated emo with its lyrics, more on the sad, melancholy side. To me, it's funny that you can just claim a whole genre of generally sad. Experimental is just like alternative to me. So all I'll add is that I believe that in its essence, experimental is supposed to push boundaries and literally experiment with sounds and instrumentation and time signature. The specific track is what I thought would be considered pop, so I don't even know how that's experimental. Classic rock is just referencing an era of rock music, which features softer rock, not a lot of hard stuff going on there. To me, it's the smooth jazz of rock. It's the most neutral and safe version of the genre, suitable for elevators or restaurant background music. I'm kind of tired of compartmentalizing metal. This is just more of the extreme version of metal. Deathcore, here we go again. So I'll just say this is the most extreme version of metal. Nintendo Core is an homage to Nintendo, the video game system. I don't know how old you are, but Nintendo to me refers to NES, the OG of Nintendo, not N64 or any of that. So it's just going to feature some of those 8-bit type sounds, cheap synthesizers, and bit crusher effects. I guess sadcore is just the maximum emo can get, on the verge of self-harm or worse. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to call grunge light heavy metal. I'm all out of analysis for anything resembling this style. I don't hear anything inherently British about post-Britpop. I would have guessed that this was something on American radio, so I can't really give you much here either. At the very least, I'm guessing that it's what was played on British pop airways. This example of noise rock is less than what I expected. I thought it would be something highly unbearable. This is somewhat tame noise, but you know, you can hear the noise nonetheless. I'm always going to associate folk with acoustic guitar and a hippie or hipster or even country western lifestyle. Funk rock is the combination of funk and rock. You're going to have a funkier bass or even guitar somewhere buried within the general rock sound. Blues rock is really, to me, just blues. You can add some electric guitar, but nothing too heavy. It's going to have a lot of similarity to country music, particularly with the lyrics. New York hardcore, I mean, how many spin-offs and variations of metal is there going to be? This is yet another one added to the list. Update me if you're keeping count in the comments. Alternative metal, update me again. But what I will say is that this is like the ballad version of metal. Jazz rock is essentially jazz fusion to me. You may hear some Wurlitzers or Fender Rhodes keyboards. Psychedelic rock is tied to the stereotypical hippie of the 60s or 70s. Getting high, cooling out, usually pretty mellow and spacey. A lot of room for solos and vamping out. Latin rock covers Hispanic or Latino flavored rock. I never understand Latin just being a catch-all for Latino, Spanish things, because it's kind of neglecting that French and Italian and Portuguese and even Romanian are all derived from Latin. But anyway, a lot of Latin rock is really just Spanish lyrics over rock instrumentals. Chicano rock is influenced by the subculture of Mexico known as Chicano. So you're going to hear some Mexican style sounds or lyrics. This particular example is just a blues rock beat with some cowbell and Spanish lyrics. I think of math rock as just music that you need to think or count while playing, which I'm not really a fan of doing, but I do appreciate a lot of math rock for going beyond the typical 4/4 time signature or even 6/8 time signature, and not just playing monotonous loops all song. Hardcore punk is just punk to me. I guess you can say it has slightly more grit to it than traditional punk. Electronic rock is just going to feature some sort of combination of synthesized sounds. It's not required to be unique, but at least it is consistent. If you are going to have a title and category, it shouldn't be arguable. Baroque pop is rock music with a blend of classical music composition and instrumentation. More metal. Nu metal seems to be a hip-hop inspired form of metal, mainly in the drums, but I don't think this is true across all nu metal. Dream pop at its core, I believe, is just supposed to feel dreamy, mainly through the use of heavy reverb, apparently. Screamo seems to just be screaming over the track, particularly, I guess, deathcore or some form of hardcore heavy metal. Surf music or surf rock to me was like punk rock of the 50s and early 60s, which had a dance pop energy to it, mainly with its drums, and you also hear some sax in it, essentially serving as a lead electric guitar. Garage rock seems more psychedelic to me, but it was really more about representing the people that were playing it, which was the stereotypical teens and young adults playing rock in their garages back then. Proto-punk is the early version of punk rock. You hear the traces of what it's fully come to be. Swamp rock is another product of some of the southern and country styles, as well as blues. It's another version of roots rock. Hard rock is very vague, but it's essentially a few stops before anything heavy metal. It's slower tempo, not as aggressive. I honestly don't know where to start here because I've heard new wave that's electronic, that's surfer, that's soft rock. I'm gonna put this one up there as one of the most ambiguous subgenres of rock. With acid punk, I'm just hearing a milder version of punk and a little bit of psychedelia mixed in there. Maybe I chose the wrong song, but this just sounds like light FM, soft rock to me. Real light, real ballady. Indie rock is another nothing description. It could be anything. It's essentially any music coming from an indie rock act, but it's kind of morphed into like a particular type of rock, which to me I call the new age light FM, or it's just some sort of pop rock. Dark wave seems pretty emo, new wave, dreamy, electronic. Gothic rock feels like British to me, which I do believe it originated in the UK. And it has some sort of interesting vocal effects going on. Synth-pop has 80s written all over it. You hear the synth-based instrumentation, particularly the bass line and melody. It has some elements of disco and a little bit of funk in it. To be honest, I don't hear much of a difference between what new wave and dream pop and ethereal wave are all supposed to be. What I've heard is that ethereal wave is a darker version of new wave, but I'm hearing a little bit of everything in all of them. Sludge metal seems like super slow heavy metal, hence the name sludge, I guess. Death metal just sounds like Armageddon. You hear the blast beat, you hear the double kicks quickly, steadily. One more metal. Prog metal to me seems that it has more arrangement to it. It's not just so much straight ahead hitting. It features more breaks within the hits. It's a little more nuanced, I guess, for lack of a better word. So after all that, hopefully I get zero, not even one person saying, why'd you choose that song? Blah, blah, blah is a better reference. But maybe I shouldn't say blah, 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 because with rock, I've seen how that could actually be the name of a song or a band. And speaking of names, here are some of my favorite band names ever, starting with the short one-syllable name section. Here are the rest of my favorite names. Feel free to recommend your band name choices. I appreciate humor and obviously creativity. Thanks for toughing this entire thing out. I welcome any corrections or educated notes about anything before this part. Also, thanks to YouTube, Wikipedia, Spotify, and all the listed publications for assisting me with research.